A great concert hall will have many acoustical qualities. Envelopment, which makes us feel we are inside the music rather than remote observers of it. Clarity, so the innermost voices of the orchestra can be heard. Warmth and richness, for a well-balanced, full-bodied sound. Liveliness and reverberance, to give audibility of the room sound during running music. And reverberation, the sustaining of the sound of terminal chords. Concert hall acoustics is multi-dimensional, and a truly great concert hall will achieve highly in each of these qualities. Why do some concert halls achieve these qualities while others don't? Many of the world's greatest concert halls were built in the 19th century, and few modern halls surpass these. Room shape in plan provides one compelling explanation why the 19th century halls are still revered over modern halls. It is impossible to get good acoustics in a wide, fan-shaped hall. But halls like the Berlin Philharmonie show vineyard halls can have good acoustics, so plan shape is not the only answer. If we take two rectangular halls that are similar in many physical respects but have different acoustical outcomes, for example, the highly revered Concertgebouw in Amsterdam and the more troubled Royal Festival Hall in London, by studying the differences between the two halls, we may get a pointer towards achieving good acoustics. The Royal Festival Hall has a width similar to the Concertgebouw. It is almost exactly the same height as the Concertgebouw. As the plan shape and basic dimensions of these two halls are so similar, why doesn't the Royal Festival Hall have the same acoustics as the Concertgebouw? Why does the sound in the Royal Festival Hall seem to be more remote than it is in the Concertgebouw? Here's the secret. It's all about sightlines, and that's what we'll cover in the next 10 minutes. There is no law of acoustics to explain why the shape of a concert hall in section should have any effect on the acoustics at all. This series of rooms, from flat floor to the steepest of seating rakes, has the same calculated reverberation time. We need to distinguish between reverberation time, which relates to sound persisting audibly after terminal chords and is measured in seconds, and what we call reverberance, which is the reverberation that's audible during running music and occurs in the first few tenths of a second after the arrival of the direct sound. In a flat-floored hall, such as the Concertgebouw, performers can project their sound onto the rear wall. It is reflected from there and returns to the performers as an integrated part of the room sound, or reverberance. But in a steeply raked concert hall, the same sound is projected into the steep bank of audience seating, where it simply dies. Looking at the cross-section, the flat parallel sidewalls of the Concertgebouw sustain interreflection of sound. The sound we see here, finally arriving at the audience after 3/10 of a second, is a portion of the sound that contributes strongly to the reverberance that the audience hears. This flat-floored hall has strong reverberance, but this steeply raked hall with the same reverberation time would have weak reverberance. The acoustical importance of the upper volume in a concert hall has long been underestimated. Henry Lee Higginson, the great man behind the Boston Symphony Hall in 1900, when observing the existing Boston Music Hall of 1852, wrote to his architect McKim that, "I've always thought our hall too high, just so much space to be filled to no purpose." Thankfully, architect McKim avoided the temptation to fill the empty space at the top of the new Boston Symphony Hall with audience tears. Had he chosen to, his acoustician Sabine would not have had the science to argue against this. The floors of modern concert halls are raked to provide good sightlines, and this was architect Peter Morrow's intention when he designed the Royal Festival Hall, but he was working on his own.
At that time, there was no such thing as a competent theatre consultant, a profession which gradually emerged as theatre building started in this country after the war, and on which I relied later on, and consisted of people who had worked in theatres and knew all about lighting and scene changes and all the rest of it. In particularly Richard Pilbrow of Theatre Projects.
There was no guidance from mentors because complete generations had had no experience of concert hall design. The very basis of the 19th century concert hall had been swept away by 2 world wars and an economic depression. By 1948, everything had changed, from the social mores of audiences and performers to the construction techniques that allowed long-span steel trusses, wide rooms, and deep balcony overhangs. As Peter Morrow observes,
so I showed round alto and Gropius, Breuer, Saarinen, you mentioned it, Gideon, Corbusier. Frank Lloyd Wright never bothered to go to the site. He stayed in the office with Robert Matthew and looked at the section and said, "Have you guys ever designed a concert hall before?" And when they said no, he said it won't work. And then he drew a kind of shape over the section, like the shape of a old-fashioned gramophone horn, and said that's the shape of a concert hall. It's absolute nonsense.
it is interesting to listen to Peter Morrow on the subject of his next auditorium, the Nottingham Playhouse, as his observations apply equally to the Royal Festival Hall.
There are one or two kind of mistakes. The stalls were too steep. I wanted really good sightlines. There's nothing worse than looking at some person's shoulder blades instead of the stage. So I raked it, and that meant that the balcony was pushed up. The balcony was rather high up, and there was a rather big gap between the stalls audience and the balcony audience, which actors found rather distressing because there was this division between the two. A thing I never did again.
Peter Morrow had thought that steeply raking the seating rows would automatically provide good sightlines to a low concert platform. But as is often the case when architects design concert halls, the seating rakes were chosen merely to link external foyer levels together. If we bring our current knowledge to analyse the 1948 design, we can see the sightline design problem that Peter Morrow created and how it could have been avoided. So, how do we design sightlines? Draw a line from the point on the stage you want to see, the sight point, over the head of a seated person, and you can work out where the eye position needs to be in the next but one row. The assumption is that you look between heads in the row in front of you and over the head of the person in the further row. In this example, the feet of the cellist are visible to everyone. As the stage height increases, the required rake of the stepping is reduced. Eventually, with a high enough stage riser, the floor can become flat or even inclined downwards. Interestingly, the stage height at which the flat floor occurs is the same as the concert platform height in the Concertgebouw, Amsterdam. For music performance, rather than say dance, it's not necessary to see the feet of the performer. If the sight point is set just below the height of a piano keyboard or a cello bow, the sightlines for music are acceptable, and the required rake of the seating is much less steep. When we extend the study to look at all the seating rows on the whole of the main floor of a concert hall, we see that the concert platform in the Concertgebouw is set sufficiently high that all the audience on the main floor can see at least the shoulders of the conductor. A typical modern concert hall, such as Birmingham Symphony Hall, meets sightline requirements with a much lower stage riser than in the Concertgebouw. The audience, even at the rear of the main floor, can see down almost to the feet of the conductor. This is achieved by gradually steepening the rake towards the rear. Despite the steep rake in the Royal Festival Hall, when the hall opened, the sightlines of the conductor were worse than those in the Concertgebouw. When preparing this video, I found it hard to believe the original low concert platform was actually ever used. But these photos show that when the hall first opened, the extremely low stage was used. Over the years, the concert platform has been raised to a height similar to the one in Birmingham Symphony Hall. The steep rate of the seating in the Royal Festival Hall is damaging to the acoustics, but does not even achieve good sightlines. However, if the designers had flattened just the front few rows of the main floor, the sightlines could have worked with the low platform they intended. In this photo, Sir Leslie Martin has his finger on the exact point where the mistake in the sightlines was made. With a flat-floored hall, it is essential the upstage areas are fairly steeply stepped. If the orchestra was on a flat stage, as shown in this simulation, only the front row of the orchestra would be visible. Steeply stepping the upstage of a concert platform makes the full orchestra become visible to the audience on the flat floor and allows the musicians to project their sound and hear each other. So why have some modern concert halls been built with steep seating rakes? The problem that designers are trying to solve is to bring the audience visually close to the performers. What acousticians call envelopment achieves this shortening of distance acoustically, and paradoxically is often in the most distant seats in the upper balcony where the sound will seem closest to the listener. But visual closeness is a real issue and a highly laudable goal, but it generates considerable acoustic challenges, as we've discussed. All too often, bringing the audience closer is achieved by wrapping steeply stepped terraces around the concert platform. So how did designers try to overcome the acoustics challenges? The difficulty is the sidewalls disappear, and so the only viable lateral side reflections to support clarity must come from balcony fronts or lower angled walls and modelled ceilings. To a large extent, that can be made to work reasonably well. However, the price is to be paid in the lack of reverberance and warmth in the room. Many of the modern designs exhibit acoustics clarity and sometimes excessive loudness, but they do not achieve a warm, reverberant sound. What if, instead of stepping up the terraces immediately, more seating rows were added on the flat? This is a modern concert hall section. You can see the downward sightlines from the audience seating and the upward sightlines that preserve the acoustics of the overhang areas. In this modern hall, the stage riser is really quite low. Unlike the Royal Festival Hall, the sightlines have been designed to allow this relatively low stage riser, and everyone has good sightlines. But if we increase the stage riser from 600 to 1100 while maintaining the sightline criteria, we see that the required steepness of the section becomes very much reduced. The stage height has increased by 500 millimeters, 20 inches, but the last row of seats has reduced in height by 9 meters, 30 feet. Now, the sound can reach the rear wall and the upper side walls and create reverberance. This would provide an acoustic that supports reverberance. While our eyes look towards the orchestra, our ears face towards the side walls of a concert hall. And this is where the lateral sound, which envelops the audience, comes from. Imagine sitting towards the rear of the main floor. We can place an enlarged head there to better see what is happening. Using traditional geometric acoustics methods, we can simulate where the sound arriving at this head is coming from. Sound that arrives within these cones will be strongly lateral, and sound which arrives from sufficiently above the heads of the adjacent audience will maintain its strength. So sound arriving at our ears from the areas of the side walls within these truncated cones is critical to achieving good acoustics. The first challenge for the concert hall designer then is to get sound onto these sidewall areas. We can see that this will happen automatically in a flat-floored rectangular concert hall. Here we see the strong sound in red, the weaker sound in yellow, and areas receiving no sound, because of shadowing, in blue. We can see that in the Concertgebouw, the listener's ears can see large areas of the sidewall strongly illuminated by the sound source on the concert platform. But within the Royal Festival Hall, the steep rake of the main floor has reduced the area of the sidewalls, and the remaining part is the opposite of flat. The audience boxes trap sound and shadow sound, so there is little lateral sound in the hall despite the rectangular rim shape. This is a major reason for the poor reverberance in the hall. In a modern surround concert hall with its steeply raked main floor, we see that projecting side balconies shadow the sidewall surfaces. What little surface remains cannot reflect sound to the opposite wall to generate reverberance. So now we understand a little more about why the 19th century concert hall works. Should a modern concert hall return to that model? No. To start with, the sightlines from a flat floor are not good enough. But halls with a low rake, like Symphony Hall, Birmingham, show that excellent sightlines can be achieved without steeply raking the floor. If designers avoid steep seating rakes and placing audience tiers up in the gods, there is a chance for the sound to bloom in the unoccupied upper volume of a concert hall. The upper volume of the hall is where that wonderful quality of reverberance is developed, and this can't coexist with the acoustic absorption caused by audience seating. We've seen that good sightlines or bad sightlines can be independent of the steepness of the seating rake. But to provide the strong reverberance that's so desirable in concert halls, seating rakes and ceiling heights must be designed so there is plenty of empty space at the top of the concert hall. Will this allow us to have our cake, audience wrap, and eat it? Clarity, warmth, envelopment, reverberance, all in one room? We think so. But to achieve this requires a rethink of concert hall design, with a new model emerging. We have lots of ideas on how this will look, but that's a video for another day.